And today we have Mark Davies. Uh, First of all, I have to say, Mark Davies is one terrific, inspirational guy. I've known him for a long time and have appreciated him very, very much. Today, he's continuing our overarching series, which is called Responding to a Fractured World: Rethink, React, Recreate. And his particular topic is rethinking and recreating higher education in a time of American fascism. Now, you already know it's going to be a fascinating session. Let me tell you a little bit about Mark. I'm going to read the first line of this formal intro, and then I'm going to wander away from it and let you just read it on the screen. But Mark Davies is the Wimberley Professor of Social and Ecological Ethics and Director of the World House Institute for Social and Ecological Responsibility at Oklahoma City University. He has been at Oklahoma City for 28 years. He's a fabulous teacher, greatly loved by students and faculty alike, and he has been a major leader in forging new ways in social justice and ecological ethics, which is at his heart. He's also served actively within the United Methodist Church. He is executive director of the Social and Ecological Responsibility. Oh, sorry, I misread that. Executive Director of the Leadership Education and Development Hub of the North United States for the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry. He does this work. He's constantly creating and working with others to create. So whether they're faculty or whether they're leaders in other colleges and universities, or whether they are within his denomination, he creates hubs of work with opportunities for students to do all kinds of engagement in the public. So the programs he's developed at Oklahoma City are programs in which students are actively involved. They include special courses, action reflection courses, projects, internships, you name it. And he's constantly creating these kinds of courses and has been very effective. Some of these have gone on for a very long time. And I'll also say that he's the father of two and the husband of a dynamic woman, as you can imagine. His two daughters, one is in medical school and the other one is just graduating with honors from college. So he's a good dad too. We turn it over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mary Elizabeth, and I very much appreciate the invitation to be with you today. Anytime Mary Elizabeth asks me to do something, I almost always say yes. We've worked together at Boston University. I was on the Dean's Advisory Board there for a number of years, and then also we worked very closely together on the social principles revision process for the United Methodist Church. And so I'm so thankful that you invited me to be a part of this conversation today. I'm going to share my screen. Well, I am speaking today on a subject that's obviously a very serious subject, how we can respond to the attacks on higher education here in the United States in a time of American fascism. And I will defend the use of the word fascism here in a few moments. I think there's fewer and fewer reasons for one to have to defend the use of the word fascism as we move forward in our current situation, but I'll look at that a little bit with us together. Just to give you an outline of what we're going to be looking at together as we rethink and recreate higher education in a time of American fascism, I'll begin with a short introduction where I'll highlight what I call the ecological axiom and the beloved community as a lens through which to address this question of how we can rethink and recreate higher education in a time of American fascism. And the ecological axiom connects me back to the work of John B. Cobb Jr., by the way, which I'll address here in just a moment. So we'll begin with that introduction, and then I will take some time to make the case that what we are experiencing here in the United States is actually a form of fascism. It's American fascism. It's not German fascism or Italian fascism or Spanish fascism. It's fascism in the American context, and I'll go through the reasons why I think it's appropriate to refer to it as such. And then I'll take some time to look at the threat to higher education that we're experiencing right now from American fascism and what I think is at stake as we experience that threat. And then we'll look at rethinking higher education in this time of American fascism and the need for us to begin to see ourselves as all being in solidarity with one another, and seeing ourselves as all being in this together, as opposed to thinking too much about our own individual institutional survival. And I'll be using some ideas from that very important philosophical work, the movie Finding Nemo, as we look at the importance of swimming down together to break the net of American fascism. And then I'll be looking at a vision for what higher education can be in a time of American fascism, with a focus on education for the world house, which hat tip to Martin Luther King Jr. here. The world house is the final chapter in his book that was published in 1967. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And he shared his vision of us all being members. We're all neighbors and members of one world house. And we can no longer afford not to get along in this one world house. There might have been a time in the past with the great oceans separating us and the lack of technology and transportation where we could afford not to get along because we didn't connect, we didn't interact. But in this world of great scientific advance and technological advance, where unfortunately he argues our spiritual progress and our moral progress have not kept up with the scientific and technological progress, we can no longer afford to not get along in this world house. And education needs to take that into account and educate our students to become members of this one world house together. And then at the end of our time together, I'll be focusing on another hat tip to Martin Luther King Jr. here, the fierce urgency of now for higher education. The fact that we cannot wait until it's too late to address the attacks that are being made on higher education in this time of American fascism. So that's where we're going to go together. And then, of course, we're going to have some time for some conversation at the end of my presentation. Before going on, I just really wanted to express gratitude for the life and the work of John B. Cobb Jr. and for his influence on my life and thought. I only met John a couple of times. One of those times he came to speak here at Oklahoma City University as part of our Wilson lecture series, and he gave just an amazing presentation here. But I also just wanted to express my gratitude for his thought and his work that I did not come across until seminary. I didn't come across his work until seminary, and I kind of found it on my own at a time that I really needed to find something new and different in terms of understanding my faith and my place in the world. And John Cobb's thought really helped me do that. And so even though there weren't any classes on process theology at Candler School of Theology when I was there from 1988 to 1992, I decided to write my honors thesis on John Cobb's work, and I wrote a piece called Towards an Ecologically Sensitive Ecclesiology, Ethical and Ecclesiological Implications of John Cobb's Process Theology. I don't recommend that any of you read that, but but it was really my way of exploring John Cobb's work and working through it at a time that I really needed to work through that work and see what the church and the Christian faith could do to address the really pressing ecological challenges that we were facing in the world. And John helped me so much during that process. I actually was writing my thesis while being a visiting student on a fellowship at the University of Göttingen in Germany. And they didn't have too many process theology articles in their library, and the few they did were translated into German for the most part. And so I wrote John Cobb and said, here's some articles that I really need to get access to. And he put me in touch with John Quiring, who sent me dozens of articles on process theology. So not only was I greatly influenced by his life and his thought, but also was really touched at his interest in what I was doing and his significant help in making that project come to a good fruition. So just wanted to note that before moving on into our presentation together. So we're going to be looking at the challenges of higher education that we're facing now through the lens of what I refer to as the ecological axiom, and looking at the goal of beloved community in mind. And the ecological axiom is something that I developed in my doctoral dissertation when I was a PhD student at Boston University. And there I was focusing on the thought of the Boston personalists, but I found myself going back to Cobb's work as well as I was looking at how Boston personalism could contribute to an adequate ecological ethic. I found interaction with Cobb during that time to be extremely helpful. And the ecological axiom that I discussed in my dissertation really comes from work from John Cobb that was published back in 1978. The ecological axiom that I'm working with is that all persons ought to act so as to maximize value in general, which includes the value of all life over the long run. And this axiom recognizes both the value of human persons and the value of other than human life as well. And it incorporates the insight of John Cobb, who suggests considering the following alternatives as possible ethical principles from which to inform our decision-making and guide our actions. So he lays out four possibilities for us to look at to guide our decision-making and our actions. One is to maximize value for yourself in the present. That's one possibility. The second possibility is to maximize value for yourself for the rest of your life. And the third possibility is to maximize value for all human beings for the indefinite future. And Cobb found those three possibilities as not being broad enough in terms of what we should bring into our axiological considerations. And he developed a fourth principle, which was so act as to maximize value in general. And so it's from that fourth principle for ethical action that I developed in conversation with the Boston personalists, the ecological axiom of all persons ought to act so as to maximize value in general, which includes the value of all life over the long run. And it's only by looking at our ethical decisions from this perspective that I think we are able to focus on maximizing the enjoyment of the experience of all sentient beings in general in a sustainable way. The beloved community of that Martin Luther King spoke of quite often, I think, is a more poetic way of expressing this ecological axiom, expressing it through love and justice and solidarity with the community of all life in what King referred to as our one world house. So that's the lens that I'll be looking at this challenge through, the ecological axiom, and the goal that I think we should be focusing on, the developing of one world house in which we find ways to get along together and flourish, not only as humans, but as all sentient beings. And when it comes down to it, I would make the case that higher education should be about bringing more value into the world through education. And this is one of the most important ways that we can bring a beloved community into existence. So the role of higher education, the mission of higher education, is about bringing more value into the world for all sentient beings. And it's also about striving for a more beloved community of all life. Well, I mentioned before that I'd make a short case for why I think it's important for us to use the word fascism to describe what it is that we're facing in the world today and here in the United States. I don't take using the word fascism lightly, nor do I equate the American fascism that we're currently experiencing with the fascism of Germany in the 1930s and 1940s. The context and the circumstances are different. But, as Mark Twain once said, history never repeats itself, but it rhymes. And sadly, what we're experiencing now is rhyming very closely with fascist movements of the past. In 2003, Lawrence Britt wrote a piece in Free Inquiry titled The 14 Characteristics of Fascism. These were characteristics that he found to be present in many different historical representations of fascism in the past. And I'm just going to list these, and you can ask yourself if we're checking the box in our current situation here in the United States when it comes to each of these characteristics. So, nationalism, extreme focus on national identity, and usually a nationalism that's ethnocentric is one key characteristic. A disdain for recognizing human rights, especially when it gets in the way of the objectives of the fascist regime. The use of scapegoats, blaming others for the challenges, the problems that are being faced within society. Focus on militarism and the use of military power and military threats. Significant amount of sexism is found, blatant sexism is found in most, if not all, of the fascist movements of the past. Controlling the mass media, another characteristic of fascism. Obsession with national security. Religion and government intertwined. Corporate power protected. Labor power is suppressed. There's a disdain for intellectuals and the arts. An obsession with crime and punishment. Rampant cronyism and corruption. And finally, fraudulent elections. I think if you look at our current situation, you can check the box on almost all of these. One could make an argument against fraudulent elections. Can be debate about that. But we do know that voter suppression efforts are currently underway and have been underway for some period of time as well. So I would say, yes, what we're experiencing in the United States right now is fascism. It's American fascism, but it is fascism. And the sooner we realize that and address it for the threat, the very urgent threat, serious threat it is, the better we will be able to deal with it. And this context of American fascism, this experience of American fascism in the present is clearly a threat to higher education. We're already seeing it as a threat. Higher education, we should note, has always been under pressure from a variety of ideological forces within our society. We've seen this in the past. We remember the Red Scare. Remember the time of the Committee on Un-American Activities in the Senate in the 1950s. I personally know some persons who were involved in higher education from the 1950s who came under attack by these ideological forces during that time. Walter Mueller, who was dean of the Boston University School of Theology in the 1950s and all the way into the early 1970s. At one point, he was referred to, and others were referred to as the pink fringe of Methodism, and they were coming under pressure from these ideological forces. So this has happened in the past. It's not completely new, but the current situation represents, I think, an existential threat to the integrity of higher education and its ability to be a force for good and progress within our democratic republic. And it's an existential threat that if we don't face it head on, if we don't come together in solidarity with one another and speak out and act out in relation to it, it could change higher education in the United States for the foreseeable future. American fascism is making a direct assault on academic freedom, a direct assault on the freedom of expression at our colleges and universities, putting significant pressure on them, attempting to control the research and the teaching that's taking place at these institutions by threatening to defund them, defunding them in reality in terms of withholding federal funds for research, threatening to take away their nonprofit status unless they bow down to the ideological demands of our current administration. And revoking student visas and abducting, detaining, and deporting international students simply for expressing their views, their criticisms of the government, especially in terms of criticizing actions by the government of Israel, and calling also not only for the deportation of international students, but for the expulsion of domestic students who do the same. So using force, using, in many cases, the violence of the state to not only make threats against these students, but to carry out abductions and detentions and deportations. So in light of this threat, I think we have to rethink how our higher education addresses these challenges in a time of American fascism. We have to work together differently than we have in the past, because we are all in this together. I know I'm not a college president. I used to be a dean. I'm glad that I'm no longer a dean, actually. I definitely enjoy teaching more than dealing with personnel issues of being a dean. But I know that there are political pressures that college presidents, university presidents, and anyone higher up in administration in our institutions of higher education have to deal with. I know that they have to be cautious. I know they have to be careful. I know that we are in a situation that is difficult already when it comes to the survival of our colleges and universities. Many colleges are just on the edge financially and, barely hanging on. So I understand this, but we can't let the fragility of our situation and those political challenges keep us from speaking out and acting out in relation to this threat, this existential threat that we're facing. And the way we have to do it is to no longer see ourselves as individual, isolated institutions of higher education, but to see ourselves as being in solidarity with each other. It's all for one and one for all when it comes to addressing this threat of working with and especially supporting those colleges and universities that are already under attack and speaking up for them, speaking out for them, and working with them to defend them, to protect them. And I'm going to look at some ways that we can express that solidarity effectively as we address these threats. So it's not the time to lie low or keep our heads down, even in conservative states, even in deeply red states. I am talking to you from the state of Oklahoma, which is the only state where every county was red in the last presidential election. Massachusetts was the only state where every county was blue in the last presidential election. So I know what it means to live in a deeply red state, a deeply conservative state. And I understand why presidents of colleges and universities in these states might want to keep their heads down and keep their mouths shut because of the political climate of these states. But the threat, I think, is too great for us to lie low and keep our heads down. I think even in the, and I really applaud those universities and colleges in those states that are signing on to the American Association of Colleges and Universities public statement that yes, as of yesterday, 523 colleges, universities, and scholarly societies had signed that public statement that was condemning the federal overreach in relation to our colleges and universities. And slowly, it's kind of a trickle right now, presidents from those more conservative states are beginning to sign on as well. So how does higher education stand up to a dictator? I just read a book, really a great book, by the way. I would recommend it to everyone, How to Stand Up to a Dictator by Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize winning journalist who has lived in the United States and was educated at Princeton, but has lived most significant amount of her life in the Philippines. And she wrote a book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. So how do we stand up to a dictator through higher education? Well, Maria Ressa says anytime you're standing up to a dictator, you have to draw the line. You have to draw the line that you're not willing to let them go past, and the line that you're not willing to go past. She makes the argument you embrace your fear and you don't become a monster to fight the monster. You hold to the truth, you hold to honesty, but you have to draw the line, because if you don't draw the line, you'll keep on redrawing it. If you don't draw a hard line, a hard and fast line, you'll keep on redrawing it and compromising and not being able to stand up to the dictator. And when you draw that line, you got to hold it. But you can't hold it on your own, just as an individual. You have to do it with others. And she emphasizes collaboration as being one of the key ways of dealing with a dictator, of standing up to a dictator. And her way of emphasizing it is by repeating it over and over again. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And that's what we're going to have to do in higher education to stand up to a dictator. Because if we don't, we will become, each institution, if we don't stand together, we'll become what the administration wants us to become, and that is the next falling domino in a row of falling dominoes. I don't know if you're like me, but I used to have dominoes as a kid, and I used to love to make intricate designs with them and make them fall, long lines of dominoes falling. Well, that's what the administration wants institutions of higher education to do. And they were hoping that Columbia University and the pressure they were putting on Columbia University, threatening them with losing $400 million of federal funding for research, that would make Columbia be the first domino to fall. And to a certain extent, they were right. Columbia initially capitulated to the pressure and became the first falling domino. We'll come back to that here in a moment, though, because they've reconsidered their position a little bit over the past few weeks. So we don't want our institutions to become falling dominoes. We want them to become a brick in the wall. Now, I'm 58 years old and big fan of Pink Floyd, and in Pink Floyd, the wall was a bad thing. But in this case, being a brick in the wall is a good thing, because each institution needs to be a brick in the wall against the and create a wall against the federal overreach of American fascism. I'm also of the generation where I had children in the early 2000s, which means there's a movie that I saw over and over and over again with my two daughters. I'm guessing it might have been close to 10 times that I saw the movie Finding Nemo. Maybe you've seen this movie as well, but poor Nemo, little clownfish there, he was lost. His mother had been killed tragically, and he got lost and captured by humans and found himself in a fish tank. And his father and friend Dory went to find him, and they finally found Nemo, and were able to, and he was able to escape from this fish tank, and they were finally reunited. And just as they were being reunited, Dory and other fish got caught in a net from a fisherman, and the net was beginning to lift up to the fishing ship. And Nemo, taking some advice from Dory earlier in the movie when she talks about just keep on swimming, Nemo knows what needs to be done. His father doesn't want him to get involved. He wants to be reunited and not lose Nemo again. But Nemo knows what needs to be done, and that is all of these fish in this net need to swim down in unison, swim down together, so that all of their weight is pressing on the bottom of the net. And what happens is when they do this, the ship can't handle the weight. The piece of wood that's holding on to the net ends up bending and finally breaking. And the net falls apart and all the fish swim away. If they had been swimming in all different directions, then it would have been easy for the ship to lift the net. But because they were all swimming together, all swimming down together, they were able to escape. Now, I'm not going to show you that clip because I'm a digital immigrant and I'm not very good at using technology and PowerPoints, but I would definitely recommend at some point just going to YouTube, put swim down, Finding Nemo, watch the clip, and you'll, I think, be inspired by Finding Nemo as well. But all colleges, universities, and scholarly societies need to swim down together to break the net of American fascism that's attempting to capture higher education. Thank you, Nemo. Well, how does higher education stand up to a dictator? Let's look at some more ideas here. Timothy Snyder talks about this, as do a number of other persons who look at totalitarianism and autocracy and fascism. Anne Applebaum is another excellent scholar in relation to this. But don't obey in advance. And take the experience of Columbia University as a lesson. Don't capitulate to the demands of American fascism, because if we capitulate, we're just going to keep on capitulating. It's not like American fascism is going to say, oh, thank you for compromising. Thank you for capitulating. And then it's just going to back off. No. Higher education and the critical thinking and the creative thinking that higher education fosters is the enemy of fascism. And fascists know that. So don't obey in advance. Don't capitulate. Learn from the lesson of Columbia University. Don't be a falling domino. Be a brick in the wall. Another way of putting this, so I'm sorry if there's any alumni from Columbia with us today, but we'll talk about the fact that Columbia is starting to push back now. But be a Harvard, not a Columbia, when it comes to pushing back against the threats, pushing back against the overreach of American fascism into U.S. American higher education. When Harvard stood up, it gave other colleges and universities courage. If Harvard is standing up, then we can stand up too. And you saw that with Northwestern and Cornell and Columbia rethought their approach to dealing with this threat as well. So be a Harvard, not a Columbia. Draw the line, as Maria Ressa says, hold the line and speak out. As Maria Ressa says, you know, she's a journalist, and there were times when she was under threat of arrest. There were times when her life was threatened in the Philippines, and she at times felt like, well, maybe I should just leave. It would be safer for me, safer for people around me if I just went to the United States and lived in the United States. But she felt like not speaking out would be complicity in relation to the autocratic regime that was in place in the Philippines. So work together and collaborate. Ways of doing that, ways that higher education can do that. One is by signing the American Association of Colleges and Universities statement. And I'm not going to go into the details of that statement here. I will at the very end of the presentation. But as I mentioned before, 523 colleges, universities, scholarly societies have signed on to that. And as more sign on, more find the courage, more find the ability to sign on as well. Institutions of higher education can also work together to create compacts for mutual defense against American fascism. And the Big Ten schools are doing this right now. It's almost like a NATO alliance type situation for the Big Ten. They said, you go after one of us, you're going after all of us. And we're going to come to the defense of any Big Ten school that the federal government attempts to defund or go into a situation of overreach. So compacts for mutual defense. For faculty, especially for faculty at colleges, universities, getting engaged with the American Association of University Professors is, I think, really key. They are on the front lines, making sure to defend individual faculty members, but also they're defending students. They're defending persons at universities who are under threat, under attack. So being engaged with AAUP and the American Civil Liberties Union as well, the ACLU, is really key as well. They are focused on not budging an inch when it comes to the attacks on the Constitution that we're currently experiencing, and they are an important ally for higher education in defending itself from American fascism. So how do we recreate higher education during this time? What's a vision for higher education that we can have that can help us defend higher education more effectively? I've put forward the World House vision from Martin Luther King already, this idea that we're all members of one world house. And I think that's really what higher education is about. It's about taking students personally and taking higher education personally. It's not just about employment. It's not just about professions. It's not just about careers, although those are all important things. Higher education is about preparing persons, not just employees. And colleges and universities have the opportunity to be models for participating in the world as persons in ecological community, persons who are free, but who are also responsible for their human communities and for the ecological community of which we are all a part. And education then is about social and ecological responsibility. If you want to go back to Aristotle, although for him it was limited to persons who had the ability to have leisure time, it's about cultivating moral and intellectual virtue. And so we should embrace, as we recreate higher education during this time, we should embrace the primary role of education as preparation of persons for responsible participation in community, rather than simply to transform students into consumers and commodities within our economic system, because the economic is only one part of the human community, and neither the human community nor our economic system can sustain themselves without a free, responsible, participatory, and democratic political community. And higher education helps students prepare themselves to think critically, to think creatively, to participate more fully in that democratic political community. As I think about my own context, I'm at a United Methodist related university, Oklahoma City University. So I look at the United Methodist context of of higher education. And one way of looking at this is to go back to our Wesleyan heritage. John Wesley, who lived from 1703 to 1791, the founder of the Methodist movement. The Wesleyan heritage is one of seeing the world as our parish. And if we look at that from the perspective of higher education, we can look at the world as our campus. And we're preparing students through the world as our campus to be responsible citizens in the world with the goal of cultivating beloved community for all life on earth. So looking again through the lens of the ecological axiom, coming back to John Cobb and his influence on my thought, the ecological axiom focuses on cultivating human flourishing, on cultivating other than human flourishing, and also cultivating the flourishing, the vitality, the vibrancy, the integrity of ecosystems as well. So we can recover an identity of higher education as being more than only professional education and preparation for employment, and see it as cultivating responsible participation within our communities. So I'm getting close to the end here, but just want to make a defense of academic freedom here. The protection of academic freedom and the free pursuit of truth and knowledge are critical to fostering excellence in our colleges and universities. So I'm swinging back around to Columbia University because John Dewey, he did his degree at University of Vermont. He's from Vermont, but he spent most of his career at Columbia University. He lived from 1859 to 1952. He was one of the founders of the American Association of University Professors. And he was a staunch defender of academic freedom, and he recognized its importance for the integrity of higher education and for freedom and democracy and in general. And in 1915, he was one of the founders of AAUP. And this organization, AAUP, has worked ever since to protect academic freedom and academic tenure. And Dewey recognized that without protected academic freedom, the ideological whims of persons with money and power could easily threaten the independence and integrity of our institutions of higher learning. I mean, it's difficult to overestimate the importance of education for the well-being of a functioning and flourishing democratic society. Education is one of the foundational elements of a just and participatory society, and it's a key aspect of working towards the goal of equality of opportunity for all persons. We know that the happiest, least corrupt, best educated, most healthy, most free, most sustainable, and most flourishing societies all embrace and support pluralism of thought, speech, and action. And the coordinated and sustained attacks on educators and education in the United States is a threat to pluralism of thought, speech, and action. In other words, it's a threat to freedom and human flourishing. In his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos, Our Community, in 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. said we have to address the fierce urgency of now, because if you look back at history, there's been a number of times when humanity has acted too late to address a threat, to address a challenge. We have to address the fierce urgency of now. And the fierce urgency of now, the situation we're facing, is an evil and intolerable situation. International students at our colleges and universities have been abducted, detained, and deported for using their right to think freely, speak freely, and act freely in ways that are doing no harm to others. One was kidnapped for an op-ed that, if you read the op-ed, how could it even be controversial what she said in the op-ed? This is an evil and intolerable situation. We cannot give in to the attempts at forcing obedience to the ideological demands of this administration. There is a need for a wall of resistance so that not one more domino should fall. And there's also a need to reject the false identification of all criticisms of the government of Israel as being anti-Semitism. That cannot be allowed to become a catalyst for fascist oppression. We also have to fight against epistemicide, the killing of knowledge, because the killing of knowledge is going to have a grave impact, not only on student success, but on scientific research and on a functioning participatory democracy. It's also going to make it incredibly difficult for us to respond to the ongoing and existential threats that we're facing in the world today, including the climate crisis that we're facing in the world today. So what can we do? I'm just going to end by some potential actions that we can all take right now to help higher education defend itself from the threats of American fascism. The AAC&U statement that I mentioned earlier encourage all college and university presidents to sign this. If you're an alum of an institution, write the president. If you're working at an institution, engage AAUP to encourage the president to sign. Yesterday, I personally sent encouragement to our president to sign this. It's called a call for constructive engagement. And it's focusing on speaking with one voice against unprecedented government overreach and political interference now endangering American higher education. This comes directly from the statement. And to oppose undue government intrusion in the lives of those who learn, live, and work on our campuses and reject the coercive use of public funding. Sign this statement. Encourage presidents to sign this statement. Because higher education cannot fend off these attacks on its integrity alone. We have to do it together. Also, support and collaborate with AAUP, support and collaborate with ACLU, and don't be silent. Don't obey in advance. Don't be silent. Silent is complicity. Speak while we still can speak. And keep swimming. That's all I have. I'm here to engage in conversation with you at this point. Let me.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Mark. And you've already